He's not involved in the matchmaking. He's not involved in these contract negotiations. He's more of this face. But to hear him say it under oath in a court of law, I think that is significant.
The shocking admission. The rumors have finally been confirmed by the man himself. Dana White has revealed in a courtroom that he's no longer running the UFC's daily operations, despite being the organization's public face for decades. This raises critical questions: who's actually calling the shots now, and where does the promotion go from here? Let's dive into the details. The truth came out during White's court appearance. February 5, 2026 marked a significant day when White appeared before the U.S. District Court for the District of Nevada, spending more than 2 hours on the witness stand. His testimony was required for two major class-action antitrust cases, Johnson versus Zuffa and Serkinov versus Zuffa. Judge Richard F. Boulware II presided over proceedings that were meant to address spoliation of evidence, basically whether the UFC had improperly destroyed or failed to preserve text messages and phone records dating back to 2014. White discussed his phone's automatic deletion features. He mentioned losing a device to theft in 2024. He even expressed wanting to switch back to a flip phone after these legal battles conclude. But these details weren't what captured everyone's attention. The real bombshell was his description of his current responsibilities. During questioning about his involvement in contract negotiations with fighters, White stated his participation was absolutely less than zero. He challenged anyone to find a single manager who could claim he'd personally negotiated a deal with them recently. Regarding matchmaking, determining which fighters face each other on UFC cards, he admitted that responsibility no longer falls to him. Instead, he identified Hunter Campbell, the UFC's chief business officer, alongside matchmakers Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard, as the ones handling these crucial decisions. According to White, this shift began when Endeavor purchased the UFC in 2016 and the Fertitta brothers stepped away. MMA journalist Ariel Helwani analyzed the testimony on his program, noting that insiders had known this for quite some time.
Anytime there's a contract dispute, anytime there's a big fight that needs to be made, is Dana aware? Is Dana involved from afar? Sure. Is he on the front lines? No. That's according to all the managers and fighters that I've spoken to over the past 10 years.
The contract and matchmaking reality. During his testimony, White provided concrete examples demonstrating just how disconnected he's become from operations. He referenced a recent contract situation, acknowledging he was aware of it, but emphasizing that Campbell handled the actual negotiations. He also addressed his deleted text exchanges with Conor McGregor, explaining they were purely personal conversations since he no longer deals with business matters. This represents a remarkable shift. Even when it comes to one of the sport's biggest stars, White insists the business decisions are completely out of his hands. Helwani broke down the numbers in stark terms, explaining that White's involvement in fight creation and contract structuring has become virtually non-existent.
He might come in at the very end to close a deal. He might be involved in a Conor McGregor fight, but 99% of the fights are not put together by him. 99.9% of the contracts are not put together by him. And this is not an indictment on him. I've been telling you this for a very long time. He used to refer to Hunter Campbell as like his lawyer. He's much more than that. He is, as I've said before, the most important person in this company because of how hands-on he is.
Judges' concerns and fan reactions. Meanwhile, Judge Boulware concentrated on the evidentiary issues at hand. He questioned White's explanations for the missing messages and suggested potential penalties might be warranted. The judge pointed out problems with how the UFC has handled evidence preservation and indicated the organization's device management practices could face sanctions. Additional testimony from Hunter Campbell and others followed the next day. However, White's statements dominated the conversation. The architect of the modern UFC had just admitted under oath that he's removed himself from the two most critical aspects of running the organization. For many fans, this revelation completely reframed their perspective on current UFC controversies.
As fans of the UFC, we can no longer blame Dana White for the problems that the UFC is facing today. Dana White revealed in court yesterday that Hunter Campbell is the one negotiating fighter contracts, and he's also the one that is handling the UFC matchmaking. This just goes to show the obvious.
Hunter Campbell takes over with White out of the picture for fights and negotiations. The obvious question emerges: who filled that void, and when did the transition happen? Understanding Hunter Campbell's rise to power, throughout his courtroom testimony, White consistently pointed to one name: Hunter Campbell, not as an advisor or deputy, but as the individual genuinely controlling the UFC's operational machinery, contracts, matchmaking, and the daily grind of organizing fights. Campbell's ascension to this position wasn't accidental. He was strategically placed at a pivotal moment in the company's evolution, and has been steadily consolidating authority ever since. Campbell initially joined the UFC in a legal consulting role, before rejoining in 2017 with significantly expanded responsibilities. The timing wasn't random, it came directly after the 2016 sale to Endeavor and the Fertitta brothers' departure. Lorenzo Fertitta had been deeply embedded in the operational side, contracts, matchmaking, strategic planning, and his exit created a substantial leadership gap. While White retained his CEO title and public presence, the organization was evolving from a privately owned fight promotion into a much more corporate entity. Someone had to keep the machine running. Campbell was immediately thrust into high-stakes negotiations with fighters during his first week, establishing the foundation for his expanding role. Helwani explained how Campbell was specifically brought in to balance White's public-facing position by working behind the curtain.
And, the way it was described to me when he came on board after Lorenzo left, like he was going to be the yin to Dana's yang, and he was going to be the quote-unquote bad cop in that he's going to be the one, on the front lines doing these deals.
Campbell's expanding role. The description of Campbell as the yin to Dana's yang perfectly encapsulates their division of labor. White transformed into the promotional figurehead, handling press conferences, media appearances, and television spots. Campbell became the person managers actually speak with when money's being discussed. By 2019, his promotion to Chief Business Officer simply formalized the reality that already existed. Campbell's attention centers on the highest-level deals, championship bouts, pay-per-view main events, and the most complex, lucrative contracts. Helwani didn't mince words when describing Campbell's significance, declaring him the single most crucial person in the entire organization.
It's not Dana reaching out. It's not. Very few of the managers talk to Dana. We know about the ones who have close personal relationships with him, but very, very, very few actually talk and negotiate today.
Campbell's operational control, Campbell's own court appearance, which occurred the day following White's testimony, revealed even more about his extensive responsibilities. He spoke about the UFC's unsuccessful attempt to sign kickboxing star Rico Verhoeven, exactly the type of talent discussion White would have personally conducted in earlier years, but now sits entirely in Campbell's portfolio. His responsibilities span interactions with athletic commissions worldwide. He manages emergency situations like sudden fight card changes. He handles contract renewals and mediates conflicts when relationships between the promotion and its athletes deteriorate. The scope of his duties has created widespread recognition, both internally and externally, that Campbell essentially operates the UFC's fight business. Prior to the 2016 sale, matchmaking involved a team approach with White, Lorenzo Fertitta, Joe Silva, and Sean Shelby all participating. Following the sale and Endeavor's corporate restructuring, White began directing fighter and manager communications to Campbell's department, essentially withdrawing from day-to-day involvement around 2018. The current roster contains over 700 fighters. The annual schedule includes roughly 45 events. Managing this complexity demands specialized knowledge, and Campbell's legal expertise equips him to handle the contractual aspects while his strategic thinking drives the matchmaking process. Helwani confirmed that managers and fighters have understood this reality for years. Campbell, not White, is their actual point of contact.
Hunter Campbell is the one responsible for the low fighter pay, and he's also responsible for the awful UFC matchmaking lately. To me, I believe that I owe Dana White an apology because Hunter Campbell is the one responsible for running the UFC into the ground lately. I truly believe that if Dana White was still in charge of the UFC today, that the UFC would be in a much better place in regards to fan experience. So I am glad that we can now watch the UFC on Paramount instead of having to pay $80 for a pay-per-view, but at what cost? The cards are very diluted these days, and that just stinks as a UFC fan.
Personal controversies Endeavor, and ESPN didn't impose any formal disciplinary action. White remained in his position. This incident, combined with a 2015 extortion case involving a sex tape that reached resolution in October 2020, highlights moments of personal difficulty that stand in stark contrast to White's carefully crafted public image. While neither situation resulted in permanent professional damage, they provide important context about the growing disconnect between his public and private lives. As these lawsuits continue and personal issues pile up, the UFC faces yet another serious problem, one that threatens the very legitimacy of the competition itself. The intersection of gambling, the Paramount agreement, and future uncertainties. While White sat in court discussing his diminished role and deleted communications, the UFC confronted a separate crisis potentially undermining the sport's credibility. Beginning in mid-2025 and intensifying through early 2026, a sequence of betting integrity scandals struck the organization. Strange wagering patterns emerged. Fights were canceled at the last minute, fighters got released, and an FBI investigation remains active. These problems arose as the UFC's partnerships with gambling platforms like DraftKings and FanDuel brought in substantial revenue while simultaneously creating new points of vulnerability. The most high-profile case involved bantamweight fighters Christian Dolgarian and Juan Del Valle, scheduled for UFC 324 on December 14, 2025. Just hours before the event, suspicious betting activity was identified. Significant money came in on Del Valle as an underdog, triggering the UFC's integrity team to cancel the bout. The Nevada State Athletic Commission raised red flags about the irregularities. An FBI investigation began in January 2026, examining whether fighters or their teams had shared confidential information to manipulate betting lines. Dolgarian was cut from the roster. Del Valle received a suspension. Additional bouts were pulled from UFC 320 in October 2025 and UFC 327 in January 2026. Between November 2025 and February 2026, at least 5 fighters were removed from the organization. White discussed the situation in a TMZ interview, explaining that the UFC had directly questioned the fighter before the bout, received assurances that everything was legitimate, and then watched the fight unfold in a highly questionable manner.
It was incredibly unfortunate timing, I guess, in terms of the launch of a slap league. I mean, do you think that's going to impact what happens with that, or is it good to go? Or
there is no good or bad timing for what I did. You know what I mean? There's irony, very ironic, but there's no good or bad timing for what I did on New Year's Eve.
UFC's integrity crisis. Helwani's broadcast panel examined the situation and reached a consensus that the UFC organization itself couldn't be orchestrating these schemes. The reasoning simply doesn't hold up. What motivation would a promotion have to jeopardize everything it's built for the sake of a few rigged contests? One analyst stated it bluntly.
I don't buy that. He's still involved in the top line stuff, but there are a ton of other people involved now. It used to be a very small team. There's the whole TKO team, there's the whole Endeavor team, and obviously there's people like Hunter Campbell there.
Accountability and brand impact. However, the panel raised an important point about responsibility. The UFC gains enormous advantages from being essentially interchangeable with MMA in most people's minds. This means when scandals hit mixed martial arts, the UFC's reputation takes the biggest hit.
You know, if you look at some of these guys that are in this thing, some of them are when we were in the hole, however much money. And it's like the early days of baseball. Like the money that's being made now is much more than the money that was made then, 10 years from now. And you can't control how people are going to spend their money. It happens in the NBA, it happens in the NFL, it happens in Major League Baseball.
The Paramount deal. This gambling scandal is playing out while the UFC navigates the largest business transaction in its history. TKO Group Holdings announced on August 11, 2025, a 7-year media rights deal with Paramount worth $7.7 billion. The agreement completely eliminates traditional pay-per-view in the United States. Beginning in 2026, every UFC broadcast, all 13 numbered events plus all 30 Fight Night cards becomes accessible through Paramount Plus with just a standard subscription, no extra charges required. Certain events will also air simultaneously on CBS. The deal received an expansion in October 2025 to include Latin America and Australia for the same 7-year period. It effectively doubles the annual income compared to the previous ESPN arrangement. Joe Rogan discussed how this agreement would transform the sport, arguing that making every single event available for the cost of one streaming subscription would revolutionize access.
There's going to be no more pay-per-views. All the events are going to be available for everybody for free. Every pay-per-view, every fight card that they have from the Apex, which are my favorite.
Yeah.
Everything is going to be available for free. It's an amazing deal.
I think it's going to.
Economic impact for fans. Rogan predicts this will massively accelerate the sport's growth. His podcast co-host highlighted the favorable economics from a fan perspective. What used to cost more than $140 for just 2 pay-per-view events now provides access to an entire year's worth of UFC content through Paramount Plus.
$10. So if it's let's say it's $10, that's crazy. That's $120 a year. You could watch every UFC pay-per-view. 2 UFC pay-per-views is like $140, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it? Aren't they
Yeah,
like
I think it's
$70?
like $70, yeah.
So you get all of them. Everything's free. That's incredible. This sport is going to go fucking hyper.
The bottom line. The sport is positioned for explosive expansion. So here's the current reality. Dana White's name remains on the door. His CEO title stays intact, but he's not steering the ship anymore. Not at all. According to his own sworn testimony, he hasn't been in control for years. Thanks for watching.